The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet street as the moving van pulled up to the curb. The air was heavy with anticipation as the David family stepped out of their car, eager to start a new chapter in their lives. Willowbrook House stood before them, its Victorian facade looming in the fading light. As they unloaded boxes and furniture, a chill settled over the neighborhood. The neighbors watched from behind their curtains, whispering about the history of the old house. Rumors of strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena had plagued Willowbrook for decades, but the Davids brushed them off as mere superstition. Inside the house, the air was musty and stale. Dust danced in the dim light as they began to unpack. The children, Emily and Michael, claimed their rooms excitedly, while their parents, Sarah and David, set to work in the kitchen. As night fell, a sense of unease settled over the house. Strange noises echoed through the halls, creaks and groans that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. Sarah tried to dismiss them as the sounds of an old house settling, but a nagging feeling lingered in the back of her mind. They gathered in the living room, huddled around the flickering glow of the fireplace. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, sending shivers down their spines. Emily clutched her stuffed bear tightly, while Michael buried his face in his mother's arms. Suddenly, a sharp rap echoed from the front door, causing them all to jump. David hesitated, then crossed the room to investigate. He swung the door open, but there was no one there, just darkness stretching out into the night. Uneasy, they returned to the warmth of the fire, but their nerves were frayed. Every creak and whisper seemed amplified in the silence of the house. Sarah suggested they retire for the night, hoping that sleep would bring relief from their mounting anxiety. Upstairs, the children nestled into their beds, but sleep eluded them. Emily tossed and turned, her eyes darting around the room at every creak of the floorboards. Michael pulled the covers over his head, trying to block out the eerie atmosphere. In the master bedroom, Sarah and David lay awake in the darkness, their thoughts consumed by the events of the evening. Suddenly, a soft whisper drifted through the room, chilling them to the bone. Sarah sat up, her heart racing as she strained to listen. "Get out!" the voice hissed, barely audible over the pounding of her heart. David reached for the bedside lamp, but before he could switch it on, the room plunged into darkness. Panic surged through them as they fumbled for the light switch, but it refused to turn on. Then, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the flickering flame of the candle on the nightstand. Sarah screamed, her voice echoing through the empty house as they stumbled out of bed and into the hallway. As they made their way downstairs, the house seemed to come alive around them. Shadows danced in the corners of their vision, and the air grew thick with a sense of dread. They reached the living room, but the fireplace was cold and dark, the fire gone out as if it had never been lit. Suddenly, they heard a low moan emanating from the basement. With trembling hands, David pushed open the door, revealing a staircase leading down into the darkness below. The moaning grew louder, more insistent, urging them forward into the depths of the house. They descended into the basement, their footsteps echoing off the cold stone walls. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, and a sense of foreboding hung in the air. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a dimly lit chamber, the source of the eerie moaning. In the center of the room stood a figure, its form shrouded in darkness. Sarah gasped as she recognized the face of the previous owner, a twisted mask of agony frozen in eternal torment. David stepped forward, his voice trembling as he addressed the apparition. "What do you want from us?" he demanded, his words echoing off the walls of the basement. The figure's eyes gleamed with malevolence as it spoke, its voice a chilling whisper that sent shivers down their spines. "This house is mine," it intoned, its voice echoing through the darkness. "And now, it is yours. But be warned, the spirits that dwell within these walls will never rest. They hunger for the living, and they will stop at nothing to claim their prize." With a final haunting wail, the figure vanished into the shadows, leaving Sarah and David alone in the darkness. Trembling with fear, they fled from the basement and out into the night, leaving Willowbrook House behind them. But as they drove away, they knew that they could never truly escape the horrors that lurked within its walls. For Willowbrook House was cursed, a prison for lost souls doomed to wander its halls for all eternity. In the heart of a bustling city, amidst the cacophony of urban life, lived a man named Jonathan with his wife Emily and their 2 children. They dreamt of escaping the cramped confines of their small apartment and finding solace in a larger, quieter abode. For years, Jonathan toiled tirelessly, scrimping and saving every penny he could, all in pursuit of his dream, a spacious and luxurious house nestled far away from the chaos of the city. Finally, his perseverance paid off, and they found the perfect home in a quaint suburban neighborhood. Excitement filled the air as they moved into their new abode. The house stood tall, with ivy-clad walls and a sprawling garden that seemed to beckon them into its embrace. But little did they know their dream would soon morph into a nightmare. As night descended upon their new residence, a sense of unease crept over Jonathan and his family. The silence of the suburban night was shattered by strange noises emanating from the neighboring houses. Whispers carried on the wind, and shadows danced malevolently in the moonlight. Their first encounter with their neighbors came in the form of a chilling greeting. A severed doll's head left on their doorstep, its vacant eyes staring accusingly at their new abode. Jonathan dismissed it as a childish prank, but the sinister events that followed proved otherwise. Night after night, their neighbors waged a campaign of terror against them. Mysterious figures lurked in the shadows, tapping on windows and scratching at doors with gnarled fingers. Strange symbols appeared on their doorstep, etched in blood-red paint, and eerie chants echoed through the stillness of the night. Emily's nerves frayed, and the children cowered in fear, their once bright eyes now haunted by dread. Jonathan, determined to protect his family, confronted their tormentors, only to be met with mocking laughter and veiled threats. Desperation gripped Jonathan's heart as he realized the true nature of their neighbors' intentions. They coveted their new home and would stop at nothing to drive them away. But Jonathan refused to be intimidated. With steely resolve, he reached out to the authorities, lodging complaints against their malevolent neighbors. Yet even as the police investigated, the harassment only intensified, escalating into a terrifying crescendo of violence and intimidation. One fateful night, as the veil of darkness descended upon their neighborhood, Jonathan and his family found themselves besieged within their own home. Their tormentors, emboldened by their failure to intimidate, launched a final desperate assault. Windows shattered and doors were splintered as a horde of masked figures descended upon their home, their faces twisted into grotesque masks of malice. But Jonathan, fueled by a primal instinct to protect his loved ones, stood his ground, wielding a makeshift weapon against the onslaught. In the chaos that ensued, the truth was laid bare. Their neighbors' sinister plot to drive them away had been exposed, their facade of civility shattered by the light of truth. As the dawn broke, illuminating the devastation wrought upon their home, Jonathan and his family emerged victorious, their resolve unbroken by the horrors they had endured. And though the scars of their ordeal would linger, they knew that they had conquered their fears and emerged stronger than ever before. With the support of the authorities, Jonathan and his family reclaimed their home, banishing the specter of terror that had plagued their lives. In the heart of a desolate town stood a house shrouded in darkness, its windows like eyes peering into the night. Inside, a young girl named Maggie Recent passing still fresh in her mind. Weeks had passed since her mother's departure, but the memories lingered, haunting every corner of their once warm and lively home. Unable to bear the weight of her grief any longer, Maggie made the decision to leave their house behind, hoping to escape the suffocating memories that clung to its walls. With trembling hands, she packed her belongings and ventured into the unknown, seeking solace in a new beginning. As she stepped through the threshold of her new home, an overwhelming sense of unease washed over her. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the sound of her own footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. Despite her efforts to shake off the feeling of dread, Maggie couldn't shake the sensation that she was being watched. Night fell like a shroud over the unfamiliar house, casting long shadows that danced in the moonlight. Alone in her bed, Maggie's mind raced with fear-fueled fantasies, each creak of the floorboard sending shivers down her spine. She tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination running wild, but deep down she knew something was not right. In the darkness, a figure lurked, its presence felt rather than seen. Maggie's heart pounded in her chest as she listened to the faint whispers that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. She tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat, suffocated by the oppressive weight of her fear. As the night wore on, Maggie's terror only grew, each passing moment bringing her closer to the brink of madness. It wasn't until the first light of dawn broke through the curtains that she found the courage to confront the source of her torment. With trembling hands, she searched every corner of the house, her heart pounding in her chest as she braced herself for what she might find. And then, in the dim light of the attic, she saw her. Her mother stood before her ghostly figure shimmering in the half-light. Tears welled in Maggie's eyes as she reached out to touch her, her fingers passing through the ethereal form like smoke. It was then that Maggie realized the truth. The ghost that haunted her was not some malevolent spirit from beyond the grave, but a manifestation of her own guilt and regret. She had abandoned her mother in her time of need, leaving behind the only home they had ever known. As the realization washed over her, Maggie fell to her knees, her sobs echoing through the empty house. In that moment, she understood that she could never truly leave her mother behind, for her presence would always linger in the deepest recesses of her mind.